Just press stop when it's done. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to thank Rabbi Storch for filling up the place. It's much more heartwarming than when 11 people are here, and most of them are related to me. So I really do appreciate everybody coming out. I have a very specific thing I want to talk about this morning, but it really comes on the heels of we're going through some very troubling times. It seems like we say that all the time, but sometimes perspective changes what we consider troubling times. There are literally tens of thousands of our young boys and women as well who are directly in harm's way simply because they're trying to protect us. And I think that's a critical distinction everyone needs to understand. They're not just there trying to protect their land. They're there trying to protect us. I'm not going to get too political, but Hamas has in their charter not just to wipe Jews off of Israel, but to kill every Jew everywhere in the world. Most Americans are naive and don't realize that their charter also calls for the destruction of all Christians. And unfortunately, by the time they wake up and understand that, maybe the world may be a very different place. But be that as it may, the one thing we have learned over many, many years and many centuries and many challenges which Am Yisrael has faced is that one of the things that works for us well and one of our most powerful tools is unity. And it's something we've seen really in unprecedented ways in recent weeks and months, unfortunately on the heels of tragedy. But nevertheless, unity is so critical to our success and to our survival as an Am. I want to use that as a spearhead today because Eicha is really the Megillah which tells us about the lack of unity. Specifically, it tells us about the fractured relationship between Bnei Yisrael and Hashem. And through many sources which we're going to go through today, we're also going to learn how that fracture took place, and also, consequently, and also from other sources, how that relationship can be rebuilt and put back together. So a lot of the focus today is going to be on our own personal relationships. And the reason for that is because the Chazal tell us that every healthy Jewish home is a building block in the third Beis HaMikdash. Having harmony in your personal relationships is not just something that makes you happier, it's not just something that makes going home more enjoyable, it's something that actually makes a difference on a global and on a macro matter, and a macro difference. So it's not just something where, well, okay, this will make me feel better, this will make things better. It's the little bit that we can do to help create our chalik of unity. We may not be able to unite all of Klal Yisrael here this morning. That's a bit of a broad leap for the group that's here today. But we can help to improve unity one family at a time, one city at a time, one neighborhood at a time. Whatever we can do in our Dalet Amos makes a difference. So I first want to talk about this idea that the fractured relationship between Bnei Yisrael and Hashem mirrors in many ways a marital relationship. Chazal tell us this in many places, that the union between Klal Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu was likened to the union of a chassan and a kala. It tells us that by Har Sinai, and it tells us in other places that Klal Yisrael was the role of the kala to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in Eicha, and Shir Shirim as well, there's many remuzim to the fact that this was in fact the relationship. But I don't know if any of you have source sheets. If you have them and you want to follow along, I will reference them. But our first source sheet is really the place where most of Chazal interpret the fact that there is this corollary relationship, that Klal Yisrael's relationship to Hashem is that of a chassan to a kala, or a husband to a wife. And it's from Parshas Emor. And the first line at source 1 says, Ani Hashem mikadishchem, hamotzi eschem eretz Mitzrayim, lios lachem lelohim, Ani Hashem. And this lashon of mikadishchem is exactly the line that we use when a husband takes a wife, about being mikudeshes. And Chazal learned from this that that is the nature of the relationship. It's a bond. It's a bond of trust, a bond of dependency, a bond of codependency. And that's one of the main sources that Chazal use to understand that this relationship mirrors that of our relationships. So Eicha, as we all know, talks about the fracturing of that relationship. And before we go to source number 3, which talks about directly from Eicha, about where things started going wrong, I have for you source number 2, which is from Parshas Acharei Mos. Where a simple fact, we're not talking about relationships here, but not between people, but we're talking about relationships between Klal Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. And at source number 2, in the underlined parts, you see it says, Vatidma ha'aretz, they contaminated the land. V'lo saki ha'aretz eschem, v'tamachem osa kasher ka'os agoy asher lefnechem. And the land will throw them out. Not Hashem, but the land will throw them out, because their behavior is intolerable with what the land demands. Eretz Yisrael has a certain kedusha to it, and it demands a certain type of behavior, and when we are not acting consistent with that, that's when we have problems. That's very telling, because right there, in that one pasuk from Chumash, this is not some obscure medrash somewhere that nobody's ever heard of, but in this pasuk we're really talking about one of the first fundamentals. I know I generally discourage people from taking notes because I feel it's more helpful to listen and interact and ask questions if you have them. But there are today going to be 6 or 7 key points that I feel are worth writing down. And if you write down these 6 points, I'm hoping you'll have something to take with you that will actually give you something that you can look at from time to time, so that maybe this isn't just a one morning session. This is one of those first times. One of the first things that I think is worth writing down is what we learned from this pasuk, and that's the idea of incompatibility. Bnei Yisrael can get to the point, or for that matter, the pasuk says the other nations of the world can get to the point where they're simply incompatible with the land because of the behavior that they choose. And it's really, in many ways, this incompatibility is a matter of miscommunication. So point number 1, I'll tell you when it's time to write, but it takes me a little bit of time to get there. This is not an original thought I'm going to share with you, but a few years ago, Rabbi Dr. Pelkowitz was here to speak at Sher Zion. He's perhaps the foremost expert on relationships in the Orthodox world, widely respected. And I felt it was worth coming to hear him, because while I do my own counseling with couples and I meet with people from time to time, you can never learn too much on this topic. And he was speaking, and one of the things he said was absolutely groundbreaking for me. Now, for many of you, this may not be groundbreaking, but you'll understand why in a second. But Dr. Pelkowitz spoke about this test that was done on over 1,000 people, 500 men, 500 women. And they hooked up all these men and women separately in separate rooms to all types of monitoring devices to measure their blood pressure, to measure their heart rate, to measure their respiratory rate, everything that they could do to test physiological changes and numbers in the body. And they ran these tests on the men first, and they asked them to name the 3 biggest stressful things in their life. And they named a variety of things. Most of them had similar things on their list, whether it was parnasa, whether it was about their children, whether it was about other issues they had going on. They listed these things that they had stress from. And across the board, as the men discussed these stressful things in their lives, their heart rate went up, their respiratory rate went up, their blood pressure went up. It was come out 99% of the men all responded the same way. And that is, the more they talked about the things that were stressful in their lives, across the board, the physiological changes were increasing, showing the increased levels of their stress. They then did the same test on 500 women, and they asked them to name the 3 biggest stressors in their life. By the way, there was a bigger harmony among the women about what were the stressors in their life. Most of them was about their children and about their health and all types of things that Jewish mothers are renowned for worrying about. And as they measured the women's physiological changes, as they discussed these stressors in their lives, they discovered that their heart rate went down, and their blood pressure went down, and all the physiological changes which rose in the men as they discussed the stressors in their lives went down in the women as they discussed them. And this one thing provides so much explanation for the dichotomy that exists between the way men and women try to handle stress, and accordingly, though, how they sometimes can be incompatible in dealing with these situations. When men have stress, the one thing they want to do is forget about it. They don't want to deal with it, because if I can do something about it, I do something about it. But health and this, there's things I can't do anything about. So that's time to read a book, read a newspaper, watch a ball game. Every man's got his own different things that distract him, but he wants to do something to distract him from what's aggravating him. Now, mind you, his Ezer Kenegdo, his Eicha Chayil, on the other hand, wants to talk about these things. And it's not because she wants to be mean to him and drive him crazy. It's because that's the way she's wired. When she talks about these things, she feels better and she feels calmer. So now you have two people living together who really love and are committed to each other, but because of their physiology, are directly diametrically opposed to how they want to handle a stressful situation. I guess it's one of God's little senses of humor. But in any event, being conscious of that makes a big difference. When your husband, your friend, whatever it is, when your friend of the opposite gender is not listening to you or trying to divert the topic from whatever is stressing you, it's not because he doesn't care. And it's not because he's not sensitive. It's because you're on the verge of giving him a heart attack. Okay? His heart rate is going up. His blood pressure is going up. It's not that he's a jerk. It's just the way he's wired. And by the way, I have a men's class that follows a parallel course to this, where I try to explain to them that when the women are constantly trying to drive you crazy talking about what's bothering them, it's not because they won't let it go, it's because it makes them feel better. And you need to be sensitive to that. And hopefully somewhere in there's a balance. But the point is, first of all, to be conscious of it. And be conscious of the fact that we react differently to stressors than people of the opposite gender. And understand that it's not about you. They're not trying to avoid you. They're not trying not to talk to you. They're simply trying to survive. Okay? That goes a long way. Understand that. It's not personal. So now let's go to source number 3, which is the first place we're going to look from Megillas Eicha. You'll see at the bottom of that source, I underlined 4 words. And it talks about the terrible things that Klal Yisrael is suffering during the Churban. And it says, Ki lo ina milibo. Hashem's not doing this because he enjoys it. Hashem does not enjoy seeing Klal Yisrael suffer or see them in peril. The actual translation, I guess the best word is, it's not capricious. It's not for nothing. Things have a reason. We don't always understand the reason. But what I can tell you is that one thing we can learn from this source is that Hashem wants to give us what's best. Sometimes we're deserving of it, sometimes we're not. Sometimes there's a more global picture going on that we don't understand. Whatever the case may be. There's a powerful mussar to learn from here about this exact word about not acting capriciously. We shouldn't act capriciously, and this really goes hand in hand with something we're going to talk about a little bit later, but I first want to talk about it here. And that's the idea that you should save your best for your family. It's a lot of stress on everybody today. Whether you're a woman who's juggling career and family, whether you're a older woman who's living alone and you worry constantly about your children who don't call enough and your grandchildren who call even less, they don't know that you're still worrying about them till you fall asleep every night. Whatever situation you are in, people need to know that your best needs to be saved for your family. It's too natural to put on your best performance for people when you're in 7 Mile Market and greet everybody with a smile. And when you come out to a shiur, everybody's your friend. And when you see somebody in shul, everybody gets greeted with a smile. But when you come home, you feel like, oh, this is my sanctuary. I don't have to put on my best behavior anymore. I can just be myself. And boy, did I have a tough day. And that applies to men and women equally. We all fall into this trap where, because of the love for our family, we think that we don't have to give them our best all the time. That's a trap. Our family always deserves the best of our behavior. We're going to come back to that theme a little bit later as well. The 4th source actually goes right to Eicha again. This is from the 4th parak, and the parts from Eicha I actually put in here in English as well because I thought it was so important for everyone to be able to read it themselves, which of course if I had my glasses I could do. But in any event, it says something on the lines, B'nei Yitzion hayikaron hamasuloyim ba'poz Eicha nachshavu legivlei cheresh masei deyotzer. This is unbelievable. This is directly from the words of Eicha, from the words of the Navi, explaining what happened to Klal Yisrael that brought about the Churban and the post-Churban. And he says, the precious children of Israel, who are comparable to fine gold, alas now, they're treated like earthen jugs worthy of potter. These same things which were gold years ago, months ago, days ago, are now like pottery. The same things. It's not that things have changed, it's the same things. And this thing leads me to point number 3. For those who haven't been writing them down, I'll remind you now. Number 1 was the fact that men and women handle stress differently. And number 2 that we talked about was the idea of saving the best for your family. But this is the third one that I wanted to talk to you about. And this is the idea that we don't compare. Every relationship is different. Husbands and wives interact on different levels in different relationships, and not every marriage is the same, nor should it be the same. In some marriages, the husband is really good at managing money, and the wife is really good at making sure the kids' days are organized, and in some marriages, it's just the opposite. One of my closest friends gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning every morning when his children were little to give them a bath. If I gave my kids a bath every morning, there probably would have been several 911 calls. We all have to realize that we have different talents and different abilities. That doesn't mean that because I'm not good at something, I shouldn't try to help. That's not what I'm trying to say. But the point is to recognize that there is a different set of strengths at work in every relationship. And the idea is to maximize the returns from your relationship, whoever it happens to be with. But don't compare. Don't look at someone else and say, boy, look at that husband. He takes out the garbage. My husband doesn't. Or look at that husband. Look how much he does to help with the kids. My husband doesn't. Look at that husband. Look how much he learns. My husband doesn't learn anything. Those are not healthy comparisons because you don't know the baggage that the other guy is carrying around. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later also. But that's the next really important point that I want you to take out of this. Be appreciative of what you have in your relationship. Look to the positives, accentuate the positives, and don't compare. Because the comparisons aren't fair. Because as we talked about before, most people are out there showing you their best. And you don't see them when they're at their worst. Everyone has their baggage. The next source that you see on your sheet is source number 4, which we just did, which talks about this comparison idea. And this idea of comparing is so fundamental as the way it's described in Eicha. The Navi is telling us that it's the exact same thing that's being compared. It's Klal Yisrael. It's the same Klal Yisrael that there was a month ago, a year ago. It's just the way it's viewed is differently. It used to be viewed as gold by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and now, because of things that have transpired, it's viewed like pottery. The lenses that we look through things can sometimes be much more dictating as to what we see than what we're actually looking at. And that is, again, Klal Yisrael may or may not have changed. The Navi doesn't say that Klal Yisrael changed. He's not even talking here about what they did or what brought it about. He's just saying how they're viewed has changed. We can each look at this bench and see a bench, but we can see it one way or we can see it another way. And in people, much, much more so than that. Number 5 on the source sheet is from Parshas Bechukosai. And again, this is a pasuk which I think tells great stories about how we need to be conscious of how we act. It says, Vizbadu es avonam ves avonovosam. They'll confess all their sins and the sins of their fathers. B'ma'alam asher ma'alu bi v'af asher olcholchu imi b'keri. And they'll talk about how they acted with treachery and they treated me with casualness. And that idea of treating people with casualness is really fundamental to where things start going wrong. You can't take things for granted. And we're going to lump 2 of our writing points here together. Number 1 of the writing points would be this idea of what causes you to love somebody. So many people think that you love somebody because of how good they are to you and how much they do for you, when in fact, it's just the opposite. If you ask any person who's ever adopted an infant child and ask them, do you love that child as much as you love the biological child? Uniformly, they will say absolutely. Granted, there's a bond that comes from having carried a child and giving birth to them. There's no question there's a physical and emotional bond to such a child automatically at birth. But the lasting bond of love that one feels for a child is mostly due to the love and the effort and the work that you put into the child. And that's proven from the fact that dads love their kids too. Okay? I didn't carry any of my kids. I didn't give birth to any of my kids. But nevertheless, you don't even get as much as a smile from them till they're several months old. But those first few months where you're carrying them, standing up in the middle of the night and walking them and singing them the most ridiculous songs that drive you crazy because it'll calm them down, those are things that parents do because of the love they have for the child. And that love that they're constantly giving to the child, the giving that they're constantly giving, is what causes them to love the child. It's an investment. They're investing in that relationship. And what really brings true love in a relationship is the more that you put into it, not what you get back. What you get back, though, coincidentally or not, is often tied to how much you put in. You've got someone who's not here today, and they've got this casualness in the relationship, and they're taking too much of your goodness for granted. Most of you, not all of you, there are relationships that can be damaged to the point where they need professional help to really heal. But most people here will find that if they would invest more in the relationship, gratuitously, not because they're expecting anything else in return, but just think about, what can I do for this person in my life to make their day better today? What would make them happier today? Not only will you love this person more, but you will find that they will often reciprocate back. That's just human nature. But if you want love in a relationship, love doesn't come from what they give to you. Love comes from what you put in. And again, I'm not singling women out for this. It happens to be who's here this morning, but I have a very similar parallel track for the men. But that's the next point, this idea that you have to put into a relationship in order for love to last. Going to page 2 of our source sheet, there's another telling pasuk from the Navi in Shmuel Beis. This is from the 19th parak of Shmuel Beis, and the underlined portion says, "Vayavu David el Beiso Yerushalayim, vayikach melech es eser nashim, pelagshim asher hiniach lishmor habayis, vayitnem beis shmerish, vayichalkaleim, va'alehem, v'lova, v'tiyena tzuros ad yom musan almanos chayos." This talks about the fact that David HaMelech had many wives and many concubines. Not as many as Shlomo Melech, but David had his fair share. And it talks about a trying time in David HaMelech's life. And right here, there's a powerful musar for all of us as well. David HaMelech understood that he had a chiyuv to support these women that were his pelagshim. But he was frustrated with where things were going in his life at that point, whatever it was. And it says that he took them to a special dormitory facility, for lack of a better word, and he continued to support them there, and he fed them, and he gave them clothing, whatever it was they needed. Belova vatiyena. He was not intimate with them. The relationship ended there. The relationship was now one of him supporting them financially, but there was no intimacy. Vatiyena tzuros ad yom musan almunas chayos. And they lived out their lives like there as if they were widows. That's a callousness that comes from being things in a rut. David HaMelech obviously had his reasons, and that's not well beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. But the parallel for us is very telling. Again, this idea that you can't get used to things. You get into a rut that this is Monday, this is Wednesday, this is Friday, this is 2011, it's 2012, and the freshness that was there, the desire to make the relationship better is gone. The desire to make it special dissipates somehow, probably because life gets busy or whatever the reason may be, but it's a danger. And the pasuk says this with despair. All the lashon in the pasuk is one of despair about how this is an example of how not to have a relationship. That's why the Navi adds in, "Vatiyena tzuros ad yom musan almunas chayos." Not only was this not ideal, obviously, but these women were condemned to suffer like almana, like living almanas for the rest of their life. And there can be nothing worse than being in a relationship that doesn't have that freshness, that doesn't have the sweetness, that doesn't have the things that people look for in a relationship. And again, it's something that can be repaired, and that has to do with, again, what we're each putting in. So that takes me to I don't know whether up to fourth point or fifth point that I wanted to make, but it's the idea that when young people get married, or for that matter, when most of us got married, I don't know whether you're aware of this, but my daughter recently got married, and we were looking for an unusual place to have the wedding, something out of the cookie-cutter box. Maybe there's a beautiful beachfront, or someplace by the water, someplace in a park, someplace that's just has some ruach that you don't generally see in your catering hall. And if you look for such a place, in most places, you will find there are such places. You can get married on a marina, you can get married at this catering hall which overlooks a sunset, all different places. But they all have a maximum guest attendance of about 110. Well, that covers my side of the family and not my wife's. Doesn't cover our friends, not to mention obligatory people that you have to invite. 110 guests, well, guess what? That's considered large by Gaisha wedding standards. Gaisha weddings typically have 100 guests or less. Now, granted, if you're making weddings every 4 years when you get married, you invite less people and spend less on weddings. But that's really the point that I want to get to. Why is it that we make such huge weddings? Is it a big deal? Sure, but you'd like to think it's a big deal for the Goyim too. At least it was at some point, but even 50 years ago, when most Goyim stayed married for longer, they didn't make weddings like we make weddings. We make weddings like it's a wedding, you know? And again, there's a reason for that. Because when everyone comes to see this couple joining, when everyone is there, when the ksuba is read, when everyone is there to see that they are committing to each other as a ring goes on a finger and promises are made from husband to wife and wife to husband, that means something. You're part of a community now, and you have a responsibility to us. You're not just getting married and saying, well, we're going to give it the best shot we got. No. We are all here because you're now part of a larger group. That group of Am Yisrael, the group of Klal Yisrael, that views marriage in a whole different way than what you hear and see in the outside world. When you get married, you have an obligation to make it work. Now, I'm not suggesting, again, there are situations where a marriage can't work. There are, unfortunately, people out there that have issues, whether they're psychological or whatever, and for some reason, one person or the other cannot stay in the relationship. I understand that. I'm talking about the many young couples that I see today who simply fall out of love. We're not in love anymore. Okay. That is a breach of the trust that happens when everybody is there to watch you get married. They're all there to watch you get married because they want you to succeed in this, because they need you to succeed in this. Because when your marriage doesn't work, and I'm not talking about simply coexisting, when it doesn't work properly the way it's supposed to work, we are all hurt. We're all hurt by a relationship that isn't healthy. And that's the reason that we make big weddings. Because when they say Kadas Moshe Yisrael at the end of Harayat Mikudeshes Li, that's what they're referring to. It's not just Kadas Moshe, which is halacha, but Kadas Moshe Yisrael, all the people that are here. You're part of a group. And we have expectations. You're not entitled to call it quits casually. Again, I understand there are reasons why sometimes a marriage doesn't work. But you're not entitled to call it quits because, well, we're not in love anymore. Get back in love. You laugh. But let me tell you a story. I had a couple that I'd known for a long time. They were clients of mine, and they usually came in together. And on one occasion, husband came in by himself. And I said, "What's going on, Jim?" And he says, "Well, I'm actually here because I need a divorce." I said, "You? Jim, you and Linda seem so happy every time I see you. What's going on?" He says, "It's just the act has worn thin. It's just not there anymore." I said, "Jim, are you in love with somebody else?" "Oh, no, it's nothing like that. I'm just not in love with her anymore." I said, "Would you like to be in love again?" "Of course." I said, "Well, Jim, let me give you a little hint. Usually it's just as easy to fall back in love with the person that you fell out of than it is to find someone randomly and fall in love again. You can fall in love with the same person a second time. It takes work, it takes effort, but you didn't fall in love the first time without work or effort either. And this takes us to the next quotes, which we're going to take directly from Megillus Eicha, which I think really bring home this point. This is actually from the first parak of Eicha. There's a lot of pain in here. The first part that's underlined is, alas, she sits in solitude. The city that was great with people has become like a widow. Again, the pasuk is couched in perspective, not really how things have changed, but the way we view things has changed. Then the second part, she weeps bitterly in the nights, and her tear is on her cheek. She has no comfort from all of her lovers. All her friends have betrayed her, and they have become her enemies. Talk to people that are getting divorced, and you will find this phenomenon. It's not just their spouse who has turned on them. It's not just their spouse who isn't putting enough into the relationship, but they find all their friends are treating them differently. Everything in their world has gone bitter. Well, I had a secretary, and people from my family know this is true. They saw me go through it. She was with me for almost 12 years. And when she turned 54, 55 years old, she had the classic midlife crisis. And she locked her husband of 27 years out of the house one night and decided to go live with someone who she met on Craigslist in a motorcycle gang. And shockingly, her work wasn't getting done because she spent the whole day on Facebook and on her computer. This was a reliable employee of mine for a long time. But you know what? All of her friends started seeing, like, what is going on? Who are you? What has happened to you? You know, if you can't get along with your spouse because of a variety of reasons, that's one thing. But read this pasuk. All your friends are treating you differently? Everyone seems to be betraying you along with your spouse? If everything in your life is changing, then maybe what's really changing is you. And that's a hard thing to accept because by nature, we all change over time. We're not the same people that we were 5 years ago or 10 years ago. I often describe it like this, that when people get married, you take two lines, and one line's going this way and one line's going this way, and the point where those lines intersect is where their lives are in perfect harmony, and that's when they get married. But those lines continue, and all of a sudden you find 5 or 10 years later, we're not at the same place on the graph anymore. And that's really the part of the trick, is that once the lines intersect and that kesher is made, there has to be a commitment from both sides. The line from that point on continues together. And that means discussion, it means communications, it means a lot of different things. But this pasuk from Eicha tells us so much about the fact that we think everybody else around us has changed. Maybe you've changed. And that's not a criticism, and it's not a bad thing. It's a jolt to reality. That maybe if the entire world around me has changed, then maybe it's just me who's changed, or maybe it's my perspective that's changed. The next part, under source number 7, which we're reading, is about halfway down the paragraph. I hope people are able to follow along. We're still in Eicha, the first parak. This is what says source number 7 next to it on the second page. About halfway down in pasuk number Daled, it says, I'll just read the translation, the roads of Zion are in mourning for lack of festival pilgrims. And again, now we're talking about not only perspective, but things that brought this about. Well, we're talking about a broken relationship, and now we're talking about the fact that people aren't coming to Har Habayis for the Yom Tovim and for the Chagim. That's what we're talking about? And the answer is yes. Because there was a time when coming to the Har Habayis for the regalim became unspecial. It became a tircha. I have to travel so far, excuse me, I have to schlep so much stuff, I'm going to be away from my family, I have to spend money on karbanos. Instead of it being something which we got to do, it became something that we had to do. And then look at the way Eicha describes it. You're missing out on those special things. And that's a musar for all of us also. Life can get to be a routine, and sometimes that routine can be very good. But even with a routine that's good, you need special things. You need to do something special from time to time. That doesn't mean it has to even cost money. But you need to have some special time that's carved out so that you can enjoy the relationship. And that's exactly what this pasuk says. It just came from a point where they were mourning because there was a lack of people coming to be Ole Rega. People didn't appreciate the specialness, and they certainly didn't make time for it. Next, I would take you to source number 8, which is from Hosea. And again, this Musar, which is talking about the relationship between Klal Yisrael and Hashem, has parallels for us again. V'ridfa es me'ava. It's written in the female lashon because it's referring to Klal Yisrael, who has the role of the Kala. She will chase after other people to love her. V'lo sasigosam, and she won't find them. Uvikshosam v'lo simsa v'amra, and after she won't find them, she'll say, Elcha v'ashuva el ishi harishon. I should go back to my first husband, ki tovli, because that was good. It was better for me before. You have to see all the junk that's out there before you realize that what you had before was good. Again, human nature, right? We tend to be people that compare things. And when we're in a relationship, we can see the faults in the person that we're with. And again, we're comparing, right? We're violating rule number 2. We're comparing and seeing that person looks better. This person does more of that. This person doesn't have to do as much of this. And then you get out there and you realize, boy, what I had before was really, really good. Well, why do you have to hit rock bottom before you see what's really good? Why can't you count the good in your life every day when you wake up? Everyone has some good qualities, some redeeming qualities. And those qualities were enough, whether it's a husband and wife, or whether it's friends, or whether it's children, whether it's siblings, whether it's aunts, uncles, or grandparents. Everyone has something good that comes out of that relationship. And if you count the good things in the relationship, you're not going to get to the point where you have to see how miserable other people are in order to appreciate it. Appreciate what you have. Then source number 9 is from Yirmiyah. And this is start talking about tikkun. This is actually from the Haftarah, which we read just last week. And it's at the absolute depths that Klal Yisrael had sunk to when things were terrible. And Yirmiyah says to them, Hashem zacharti lach. Hashem will remember you. Chesed ne'urayach. He's going to remember the kindness you did for him in your youth. Avas klulosoyach. The love of a new couple when they wed. Lech techa harai ba'midbar be'eretz lo zarua. That you followed Hashem into the midbar in a land that had nothing. It was not sown. This is a pasuk that's loaded. Yirmiyahu is not just telling us that Hashem is going to come back to us, but look at what he tells us. He says, Zacharti la chesed ne'urayach. He remembers the kindness of your youth. Again, we talked about this before. When you're kind to someone, that's what makes you love someone. It's what you invest in the relationship that makes the relationship work. Not because you're expecting something in return. That's a good byproduct that will come. But invest in it because that's what makes you love in the relationship. And that's exactly what the pasuk says. Hashem will remember chesed ne'urayach, the kindness from your youth. Avas klulosayach. Now we're not talking about chesed, now we're talking about love. The love of a newlywed couple, of their commitment to each other, of their desire to do things for each other. And then listen to this. Every word in this pasuk is loaded. Lechteich acharei bamidbar be'eretz lo zarua. Here's where Yirmiyahu is going to describe for us the cornerstone of the relationship, of why Hashem has such fond feelings for Klal Yisrael, why the feelings run so deep. And you think it's because of the tefillas, you think it's because of karbanos, you think it's because they're good moral people, all the different things that it could be for. But no, that's not what Yirmiyahu says. He says, Lechtecha charai ba'midbar be'eretz lo zarua. They followed me into a desert that wasn't sown. There wasn't a weed growing. Faith and trust. And trust is really the cornerstone of everything. We have to always make sure that we give the people that are important to us reasons to trust us. Trust comes in many levels and many different forms, but primarily it means that they can depend on you. People need to know that they can depend on you. I have perhaps on any given day right now, if there was something that I absolutely needed to have done immediately, there was a crisis, I have a minimum of 15 people on my phone that I could call. And I know that whether they're at work or whether they're at home or whether they're out of town, they would drop everything they need, everything they're doing to help me. Because I'm a very lucky person. I kid you not, there's at least 15 people right now in my phone that if I needed something this second, they would come here from Australia, from Muncie, from downtown. If I needed something, they'd be there in a second. That's what trust is about. And I have to say, for almost all of those people, and maybe more, I would do the same for them. That's the type of trust we're talking about. Who goes into a desert where there's not a weed growing and said, God, I know you're going to take care of me? Everyone talks about these psukim where Bnei Yisrael rebelled and said, there's no water. Did you take us out into the desert to starve? Well, you know what? Even when there's miracles happening, God is somewhat distant. You don't see him every day. This was before the mun is even falling. It's hard to be in a situation where you're depending on a miracle. Nobody wants to go to bed each night knowing that they need a miracle for the mun to fall in the morning in order for them to live. That if the miracle somehow stopped, they would die. That's a lot of stress to put anyone under. No one likes to be in a position where they're so dependent on a miracle to survive. That's stressful. But it also means that when Bnei Yisrael followed Hashem into the Midbar, to Eretz lo zarua, to Bamidbar lo zarua, that was the ultimate in trust. A trust that Hashem had obviously earned, but a trust that after it was earned was appreciated and followed. And that trust is key to any relationship which is going to last, obviously. Finally, source number 10 comes from Koheles. And this is where there's more of a plea from Shlomo HaMelech's standpoint, where he says that despite the fact that Klal Yisrael has its ups and downs, Hashivenu Hashem Elecha v'nashuva chadesh yameinu kikedem. The key word again being kikedem. Always remembering like it was before. And for this, I want to give you one more of those points that really drives home what this pasuk means. And that's that tone matters. This pasuk is couched in the softest of tones. That we're not talking about comparisons, we're not talking about the grievances, we're not talking about things that went bad. We just want it the way it was before. And there's two ways to get to that, and these are going to be the last 2 points that I ask you to write down. There's two stories that happen in the Chumash. One with Beno Slavchad, which almost everybody's familiar with. The other with the Beni Shmitzri. I'll give you a quick background. The Beni Shmitzri was a person who had a Jewish mother, but an Egyptian father. Rashi says this was the only time a child was born out of a relationship from a Jewish woman and an Egyptian father while they were in Mitzrayim. And the Gemara explains exactly what happened there. Whatever it was, this child had a Jewish mother and was Jewish, but had an Egyptian father. And when Chalakim were giving out in Eretz Yisrael, he didn't get, because Chalakim were given out by fathers' families. So he wanted to claim a chelik in chelik Shimon, because that was where his mother was from. And Shimon didn't want him. So he came to Moshe Rabbeinu and he started arguing and said, this is corrupt, this is unfair, you're making up the rules, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is unjust. And things escalated from there to where he's Mekalel Hashem, and he ends up getting skila. Okay, terrible story, terrible tragedy, we move on. But then the story of the Beno Slavchad is remarkably similar in many ways. The Beno Slavchad came and said, you're giving out halakim and we're not getting, because our father died while we were in the Midbar. He didn't do anything wrong per se. We weren't, it's not that we didn't have a Jewish father, or it's not that we weren't entitled to a chelik, but because our father happened to die before you gave out the halakim, we're not getting a chelik. And they approached Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu consulted with Hashem. What do we do? And Hashem told him the Beno Slavchad are speaking correctly, and they should get a chelik. And it begs the question, the Beno Slavchad were really making the exact same point that the Beni Shmitzri was. You're giving halakim out by fathers' families, and we don't have a father. There's an injustice going on. Yet one gets skila, and the other one ends up getting a chelik and has their complaint addressed. What's the difference? And again, if you look in the psukim, it's powerful. The Beni Shmitzri comes out swinging. Moshe Rabbeinu, you're corrupt. You're making this up all as you go along. Shevet Shimon is treating me unfairly. They're Rishayim. Hashem is unfair. And it escalates from there. But look at the lashon of the Benos Lachad. Vatikravna says they approached Moshe Rabbeinu gingerly, kindly. And they explained to him that inequity seems to have occurred. The exact same complaint with radically different consequences in the way it's addressed. And the only explanation is that sometimes the way we say things is as important as what we are saying. Tone matters. Speaking to people in a measured voice, in a certain type of tone, can make a huge difference. The last tip that I'll give you is probably the most important one. And that is everybody, when they get married or is in a relationship, they want things to be the way it's always been. Well, I got news for you, folks. Love has an expiration date. You take it out of the refrigerator one day, and it'll say, do not use past, whatever it is. Whatever love you have, however rich it is, and whatever relationship you're in, it will fade. That's the nature of things. Unless, and here's the key, you can build new love every day. If you build love today, then you have a month, 3 months, 6 months, a year, before the effects of that love have worn away. But if every day you're constantly putting more into the relationship and constantly giving the person more reasons to love you, then you're constantly buying yourself another year or another 3 months or whatever it is. It's as soon as we start resting on our laurels and saying our relationship is good now, I no longer have to put into it. When you do that, that's when the expiration date starts to run. You have exactly a finite amount of time from when you stop putting into a relationship until the foundation of the relationship has gone sour. But as long as you're putting into the relationship and working on the foundation for it the way you did, kikedem, then you continue to push off that time for when the relationship gets sour. And indeed, you preserve what you had for a very long time. Indefinitely, forever, if you continue putting into it forever. But that goes directly to how we speak. And we've talked about this in many forums before. How we talk is very important. The koach of dibur is very powerful. In these times, these are keys to maintaining healthy relationships. Every time that you have a healthy relationship, obviously with a husband and wife, it's on a different level, but for every healthy relationship, you are making the geula closer. HaKadosh Baruch Hu craves unity, not just from us, even from the Goyim. There's many rayas from Chazal about how the Goyim have been rewarded over time when they show a unity. There's by Yonah, when Nineveh did tshuva, they were forgiven. Not because 1 or 2 or 10, like the story with Sodom, where even 10, but the unity of the people was so good that it could overcome years and years of things. So these are the points that I want us to take out of this, not because I want us to all have great relationships. I do. But because on a more macro level, this is how we change the world from here. This is how we affect things in Eretz Yisrael. This is how we affect things in Klal Yisrael, by making our relationships better, one family at a time, one neighborhood at a time, one city at a time. Just to review the points real fast, because I see the time is late. Number 1, understand, particularly when dealing with people of the opposite gender, we react to stress and we handle stress differently. We're not being insensitive to each other, it's just that we think and act and feel differently in response to stress. Number 2, what we learn from adoption is that the more you put into a relationship is where the love comes from. The love in a relationship comes from the giving, not from what you get in return. Number 3, don't compare. Value what you have in your own relationships. Don't look at other people and see they have more than I do. Yeah, they may have more than you do. And I'll give you just one pasuk that shows you that. There's a pasuk in the Aseres HaDibros by Lo Sachmod where it tells you not to covet your neighbor's wife. But it doesn't just say your neighbor's wife. It says don't covet your neighbor's donkey. Don't covet your neighbor's servant. Don't covet your neighbor's house. And then it says, or your wife, or v'chol asher lo, or anything that he has. So people ask, why does Hashem have to give us a laundry list and then mention their wives in conjunction with all their other property, and then v'chol asher lo? Why didn't Hashem just say, lo sachmod kol asher lo? You shouldn't covet anything of your neighbors. And the answer is because Hashem is telling you, it's a package deal. You want someone else's house because it's nicer than yours? He's got other stuff that you don't have. Everyone's got a pekala. Everyone's got their problems. You think someone else has it so good? Believe me, they have their issues too. Everyone has their issues. It's easy to be a good person when everything's great. Who we are is determined by how we react and how we act when things aren't perfect. That's what defines who we are. The next part is the idea of large weddings. We get married at large weddings for a reason, because married couples are part of a tzibur, and they owe a duty to all of us, and we owe a duty to them. We're all in this together. When one marriage goes bad, we all suffer a little bit. Finally, the last point that I made was that tone matters. The koach of dibur, the way we speak, makes a difference. The other points we made were save the best for your family. Whatever issues you have, if you need 10 minutes when you get home, or 10 minutes when your spouse gets home, or 10 minutes before you make a phone call to your parent, your grandparent, your grandchild, to calm down and try to de-stress yourselves from whatever it is that's stressing you so that you have the ability to give the best to your family. Your family deserves your best, not what's left over after you've given your best to everyone else. Next, you can fall in love again by the same methods we talked about before. If you put into the relationship, a byproduct of that will be that usually the other person will put back in as well. And finally, this concept that love has an expiration date. But you never have to reach that expiration date. You never have to reach the expiration date as long as every day you're putting more into the relationship and making the other person love you more again, because you're indefinitely pushing off that day. I don't have all the answers for everything, but I can tell you that we've seen over the course of history that when Klal Yisrael is in healthy relationships with each other, we fare a lot better. There's so much discussion going on now about how the parents and families of these 3 teenagers that were killed managed to bring Klal Yisrael together in ways that was unprecedented. We shouldn't have to wait for such tragedies to happen to be united. But the fact is, it happened. But we shouldn't lose it either. The value of every relationship we have is important. It makes a difference to Hashem. It makes a difference in the way He views us as an Am. It makes a difference in Eretz Yisrael. It makes a difference to every soldier who's fighting on the front lines. And hopefully, by building healthy relationships and being positive with each other, we can be zocha to the last pasuk in Eicha, which is the Hashivenu, and Hashem will bring us back to Eretz Yisrael. Thank you.